honorable members, our support staff, everybody is on the platform, members of the media. Good morning to you all. This is the continuation of the process of the approval of the 2023 Appropriations Bill. So today we are continuing that process. Our constitution enjoins us to consult with the public. As a result, today we are having public hearings to try and get the views of South Africans and their inputs in the lawmaking process. I will share with you who's on the platform, but for now, we really appreciate those members of the public through their organizations who always make their voices heard. Before we proceed, Mr. Mashile, can we have apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We had an apology from Mr. Murray, but I see he has joined the meeting. Maybe he would be in another meeting during the course of time.
Okay. Is that the only apology? There's also an apology of company secretary at Derin, who's off sick, wishing him speedy recovery. All members, we have Youth Capital, you're welcome. We have Congress of South African Trade Unions, you're welcome. We have got Equal Education, thank you very much for making yourselves available. Public Service Accountability Monitor. I think those are the organizations will be making presentations to us. All members, we do receive other inputs where members of the public will prefer to write to us rather than appearing. We do also appreciate those inputs. The way we're going to do it will allow the different organizations to make about 20 minutes input. After that, we'll allow the members of the committee, the all members, to interact with the presentations which have been made. When they do pose questions, they will say to who is the question directed to. And then after that, we'll then allow the presenters to respond to the issues that would have been raised. Let me quicken to say, all members, members of the public who availed themselves today, say we really appreciate you are being here, and we do take into considerations some of the things that we are saying. We may not achieve everything that you would like to see happening. Just remember, budgets are always contested. There are many needs with a limited budget. So, having said that, let me see how we start with Youth Capital. Mashile, am I right?
Yes, you're right, Chair.
Right. I'll request the presenters to show themselves, introduce themselves, and then take us through their presentations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chair, and thank you to everybody for the time. Good morning. I am Mrs. Crystal Duncan Williams, and I lead the project at Youth Capital. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and begin, correct?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I think you can all see now.
Not yet. Please continue.
Loading.
It's loading, yeah.
Okay. So this is our first time presenting to the committee. So we're Youth Capital. We're a project incubated by the DG Murray Trust. What we really do is we're a campaign that advocates for youth-centered, evidence-based, and solutions to youth unemployment. And we try to identify and shine a light on the roadblocks that hold us as young people back. And we really focus on solutions. So we don't just want to talk about the problems, we do want to focus on the solutions. And we do that by bringing together young people, civil society, decision makers, and always basing it on research. So why Youth Capital came into existence about 5.5 years ago is because we clearly know that the solutions on the table are not being as effective as we need them to be. There isn't a common vision between all the role players in the sector, and that young people's experiences are not represented sufficiently in higher level decisions. And so to that end, we have the action plan, which is really the result of consultations with young people across the country, as well as research and evidence from things like Stats SA and the General Household Survey. And we think that the action plan is really important because it looks at the entire journey young people are on from learning to earning. Young people's problems to earn an income don't start the day they start looking for work. It starts long before that. And so this action plan really looks at difficulties in education through the transition phase between education and a job, and then looking at the landscape of jobs. What existing opportunities are they? Talking about the informal sector, talking about public employment programs, which is something that's a big part of my presentation today. And I just wanted to put this up there just to contextualize the problem. And I know we hear the numbers of how many people are NEET and the huge unemployment rates, and that might wash over us over time. But we ran a survey about 1.5 years ago now, and things have only gotten harder for young people since then. And at the time we ran that survey, over 2,000 young people told us that 8 in 10 of them have to choose between looking for work and buying food. And that is a really scary statistic, and that is the reality for the majority of young people in this country. So what have been the youth unemployment trends over the last decade or so? Young people account for half the working age population, so they should really be driving our economy and our economic productivity. But they have a much lower absorption rate than their older counterparts. And we can, go into a lengthy discussion about why that is, but that is the reality. And so if we look at the period between 2008 and 2022, total employment increased. And so what happened in that period is that 2 million jobs were created. But if we break it down according to the age categories, between 2008 and 2022, which is a long time, 2 million jobs were created for only those over the age of 35. And 1 million young people actually lost jobs in that time. So, if we look at that, in all of that time, in the last 19 years, the economy has created only 400,000 jobs for young people. And so what we did in partnership with an economist we work with is we looked at the employment multiplier. And usually economists would talk about the general employment multiplier as a relationship between GDP growth and employment. We looked at it for youth specifically, so those between the ages of 15 and 34. And all of this detail is in my longer presentation. So I'm just going to focus on the highlights in this oral presentation. But employment would have had to have increased by 3.4% a year to absorb all of the new entrants into the labor market. So we would have required a GDP growth of about 3.7% a year just to keep unemployment from rising. That's not even to chip away at what was the existing numbers of unemployed at the time. And in that same period, the labor force for those aged 15 to 34 grew by almost 1.7 million. And if we look at all these numbers and we do the calculation, the youth employment multiplier is less than 0.1. That is really, really shocking. There's clearly, the size of our GDP growth is clearly not creating employment for young people. So, some of what we're going to say in our recommendations might seem like a bold statement, but I think when we have 4 in 10 young people that are not in employment, education, or training, then we need to be really bold. So I'm going to focus on the 4 recommendations in the interest of time. And like I said, my biggest focus for today, and something I really want, if you forget everything else that I say, Point two around public employment programs is really the most important thing that I want to land from this presentation, but I'll also be speaking about a vision for the economy that gets that GDP growth to the level we need it to be, industrial policies and infrastructure investment, all of which, can create an environment in which we can get a greater GDP. So what do I mean by mobilizing vision and plan? So we know that the NDP has set targets to achieve 5.4% GDP growth. We are nowhere near that by 2030. And so I think it's safe to say that our current macroeconomic policy framework is not doing what it needs to. And so what we need is we really need a GDP growth target that is binding on National Treasury and the Reserve Bank. We all know that things get done when there's a KPA or a line item that's measured. And so this is why we're making this rather, I think, bold statement. If we look at the last 3 decades and the various phases of the economic growth over that time, what we can see is that the economy grows and creates jobs when government invests in people and infrastructure. So it might seem counterintuitive, but the bottom line is we need to spend money to make money, and that's true for the economy as well. And so if we really want to achieve that, then the government needs to spend an additional 3% of GDP, which is about 220 billion, to achieve the GDP target just in the first year. We do think that as private sector responds to the growing economy, they will also increase investments, and that as a result of that, GDP growth shortfalls will decline over time. So initially it might seem like a big investment, but over time we do believe that you will get a return on that investment. And then my biggest point for today, the continuation of large-scale public employment programs. And this is public employment programs for young people has been a key feature of Youth Capital's work. So if we focus specifically on the presidential employment stimulus, which is, the thing we're most concerned about continued funding for, because it wasn't mentioned in the budget in February. If we look at what's been spent on the presidential employment stimulus over the last 4 years, it's an average about 10 billion a year, which in the grand scheme of things is not a huge sum of money compared to some of the other projects. And the return on this investment, I think, is something that still needs some research, and it's something we're going to be working on. But I think the return on that investment, worth the spend. And we can talk about where that money might come from. So we know that, GDP growth alone will not address the unemployment crisis. We spoke about, the huge requirements around the macroeconomic policy to get GDP to just be at a percentage where we're just kind of stemming the tide of growing unemployment numbers. So we need other programs. And one way to do that is through public employment programs, which give young people a quality first work experience, because this cycle that you hear about from young people that I can't get a job because I have no work experience, and I have no work experience because I can't get a job. Even if you think about young people who want to be entrepreneurs and self-employed, which I know is, something that everybody's talking about. How can somebody who's never worked and who lives in a household where nobody has ever worked possibly run a business successfully? They haven't got a clue. And so things like short-term work employment opportunities like public employment programs really help with that work experience, which is critical. And you'll hear from 2 young people in our network shortly about that experience. Additionally, we know that the recent poll study, which made headline news, that 8 in 10 grade 4 learners cannot read for meaning in this country. Clearly, our education system is not coping. We know part of that problem is that teachers, particularly in under-resourced schools, classrooms are overcrowded, and so teachers can just not give the individual attention that's required to learners to catch up. Group reading, we know from research, is not going to get learners caught up to the level that they need to, because the deficits are so large and made even larger by the COVID pandemic and the rotational timetable cycle and all the learning that was lost in that time. And so school assistants are really providing a critical extra resource in schools, particularly in the foundation phase and in primary schools. And, I think that, again, the value of that long term, the return on investment for a couple of months of work for a young person, and the extra benefit they provide to the school, I think, again, is worth the spend. And then lastly, young people, when you give them money, there's various studies that we, are talking to other partners on, like Arambi, around what young people spend their money on. And they ask this, they're spending the money back in their local economy, buying food, maybe helping out with school books or school uniforms for siblings. Also, spending money on things like hair and nails, but it's in their community. And so they are stimulating local business with that 3,500 Rand that they get through the short-term public employment program. So we ran a survey with phase 1. So that was, a little while ago, but we spoke to almost 3,000 young people and over 100 school management representatives, and the resounding kind of consensus, besides the problems with phase 1, and the program has improved a lot phase on phase, is that schools love having these assistants there, young people love being there, and it's a benefit to the young person, to the school, and to the broader community. And to that point, I'm going to let young people tell you themselves. I hope you can hear.
I'm sure it's still loading. We can't hear anything for now. We can read, but we don't hear them.
Still loading?
We can read the subtitles.
But you can't hear. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll just keep going in the interest of time. Sorry that you can't hear it, but I can always share the presentation afterwards and you can listen to it for yourself.
Please do that.
Okay. Sorry, I think it's going to start from the beginning again.
Taking care of children with their training and other courses, online courses that we had to do. So, which drew my aspiration of becoming a teacher, which I am pursuing pretty soon. I'll be pursuing my teaching career because it drew so much inspiration for me to be part of the system again.
Did you hear it afterwards?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, I realized I needed to click another button. Okay.
My name is Stacey Jacobs and I'm from Stellenbosch. I was part of the Teachers Assistant Phase 1. The school I was appointed to at was just a school outside Stellenbosch. And the Teachers Assistant position gave me work experience in terms of how to communicate with workers, staff, and also learners. And I would say it helped me to network with teachers and the principal, and it also provided me with income when I did not find a job. My name is Stacey Jacobs and I'm from Stellenbosch. I was part of the principal, and it also...
Sorry, thanks. And so then our next recommendation is stronger industrial policies. And so there has been limited budget support for industrial policies during the 2021-22 government funding period. The government dispersed around 17 billion on industrial financing, which is only 0.27% of GDP. And I go into details on the numbers there, but I won't read them out. I always find when people read out numbers, it's difficult to follow. But I think what I want to focus on is the SMME sector of the economy in this. So according to International Finance Corporation, South African SMMEs of all races had a finance gap of $30 billion in 2017. So I can imagine that those numbers have gone up. There's also a market failure in the private sector provision of loans to Black SMMEs. And so what we're saying is, as we think about increasing industrial financing budgets, we need to direct intentionally a share of that towards SMMEs. So there is research that shows, on average, that SMMEs are creating over 1,000 jobs a day, and some of those might be formal or informal, and so there are obviously conversations around that. But at the end of the day, they are creating jobs, and I think we don't talk enough about SMMEs because it's one person creating one job, whereas opposed to big corporates, we can talk about hundreds of jobs or thousands of jobs. But I really think that SMMEs need more support to thrive, and to that end, Youth Capital did a piece of research towards the end of last year where we spoke to around 70 small business owners, both in person and through an online survey. And I think that, Treasury on paper will say we are giving support to small businesses. There's things like ETI. You can leverage financing through BBBE points. You have got CETA funding for upskilling, but SMMEs are not accessing this, as this graph shows. The greatest thing that the biggest number is 3 in 10, which is really low. So at the end of the day, SMMEs are not accessing this. And when we talk to them, they say often it's because of red tape. They're small organizations. They don't have HR departments that can follow up or complete the paperwork. And so I think about, financing SMMEs and giving them a little bit of a runway to be able to operate and then create jobs, I think, again, is worth the investment. Infrastructure investment. So, we can talk at length about various infrastructure issues. I know that water and sanitation are top of mind for people with a cholera outbreak, but I think it's worth mentioning here. So the NDP target was an investment to GDP ratio of 30% of GDP. And that obviously hasn't been happening, or even when there are projects, they've been stalled. And so we're saying, South Africa should recommit to the NDP target of 30%, and that the public sector must increase its investment to between 10 and 15%. Whatever is required to get to that 30% target within the next 5 years. Public sector investment by general government and public corporations was equivalent to 3.9%. And so, we need the National Treasury to look at a roadmap for how to get to the NDP target for public investment. We don't expect that this will happen overnight, but we think just having a concrete plan on how to get there might help speed things along. I know there's many NDP targets that we are far from achieving, but I think infrastructure is a critical one if you want to support a growing economy, which then can support job creation. So I am done. My email address is there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks to you, Crystal, for that presentation on young people. Take it in, it's a COSATU, am I right, Mashile?
Yes, Chair, it's COSATU.
Comrade Matthew, please come in.
Okay, good morning, Comrade Chair. Good morning, honorable members. Let me just quickly upload our document. Just 1 second. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to members for giving us space as COSATU as always, just to share some views on the appropriation bill. I think, Chair, as COSATU will always take up a premise in terms of our approach to the appropriation bill, to the budget, that it should be grounded upon what we think are the key challenges facing the country and workers and the economy. We still have an economy which is very fragile, still trying to recover from a recession, the global pandemic, etc. We have made progress last year in reducing unemployment from 46 to 42%, but that's still very, very high. We are seeing millions of workers across the economy, losing wages, really drowning in debt, and this is both in the public and the private sectors. I think we all know the issues of load shedding and how you're not going to grow the economy with 10 hours of load shedding at a time in a day. Companies simply can't operate at that level. Chair, I think the committee has been recently to Transnet and to the ports and I think in Metro Rail, and you know the issues really decimating Transnet and Metro Rail around cable theft and criminality and so forth, and many other SOEs which are in ICU. I think where we should all be really raising the alarm bells around the issue of local government, the 90% of municipalities which are in financial distress, many struggling to provide basic services, even struggling to pay staff. And of course, we know the issues of corruption, which is really a cancer in the state. I think for us, Chair, where we diverge from colleagues in Treasury, we think that we need to have a multi-pronged approach to the fiscus, not just simply a focus on reducing the debt. Reducing the debt, it looks fine in the balance sheet, but it's not going to address the fundamental issues and it's not going to sustain the fiscus in the long term. We need to really deal with multiple crises that simultaneously. You know, when the budget was tabled, it was predicted or projected that the GDP would grow by 0.9%. That has now been revised downwards to 0.3% by the Reserve Bank. We think we need to be doing more to provide relief to the unemployed, including through public employment programs, seeing how can we do more to stimulate the economy to grow, and of course, more to rebuild the state, the SOEs, municipalities, and public services. We think one priority should have been around giving more support to SARS to tackle tax evasion, and of course, more support to the law enforcement agencies to deal with corruption. If you deal with these issues, Chair, it helps to grow the economy, and that will help to ensure the fiscus can collect the revenue to pay down the debt in a sustainable manner. Chair, on the public service wage bill, so I think for us, look, we need to have a government which has a good relationship with public servants. We need to see how we rebuild the collective bargaining space. The issue we have been raising as concern about as COSATU since 2019, that we need to rebuild that relationship. The strike we saw this year in the hospitals is not good for anyone, and that's a symptom of a broken relationship of collective bargaining with PSWC. If we want to achieve the objectives, the progressive objectives of the SONA, then it needs a motivated public service, not one that is feeling demotivated, or feeling that their wages are being eroded, they're being pickpocketed by the employer, etc. And public servants, Chair, if you look at the stats, are drowning in debt. The supporting relatives who have lost jobs, who have lost wages, and for quite a few years now, they've seen their wages being eroded by below inflation or no increases. We think, Chair, there is space to assist government on the wage bill. If we can move towards a single wage regime for the entire state, not just the 2/3 who are in the public service. If we can have a single process for national, provincial, SOEs and entities, that can begin to, to address some of the kind of excessive packages given to some of the management and some of the entities and so forth. We think symbolically, Chair, would be important to reduce what people make in cabinet or the provincial executive councils. And I think especially some of the senior management and the entities and the SOEs, because we're sending a message to nurses and to police officers to tighten their belts. Yet at the same time, they would ask, why is the executive management team of the Road Traffic Management Corporation getting a salary that's higher than the president? Doesn't make sense. Chair, we think there is space to save money if we did physical headcounts of public servants, because we think from some of the reports we received, there are a significant amount of ghost posts as we had seen in Prasa not so long ago. Chair, I think one very positive part in the appropriation bill is the additional support being given to SARS. And we've seen the past couple of years that additional support that's been given to SARS to appoint competent management, to appoint an additional 500 staff, to invest in the IT capacity and so forth, has really yielded positive dividends for the country and for the fiscus. And as a consequence, we've seen an overcollection of revenue by 94 billion rand this year. Chair, we think we should really be allocating more to SARS. It's a sure investment. If you give them R1 billion, they'll give you 10 billion rand back in additional revenues. It benefits everybody. We think there's space to give SARS more support and to push them more to do lifestyle audits of the wealthy in the public and the private sectors. See what tax loopholes can we close. We think, Chair, that we should be saying, can we utilize retiring Defence Force personnel to assist SARS on the customs front, which is quite a weak spot for collection of taxes. We could also use the Presidential Employment Program there as well. So we do need to say, if we're wanting to give support to the economy, to revisit the fuel levies, because 28% right now of our taxes goes to the fuel price, goes to taxes, sorry, and that is really suffocating the economy. We think, Chair, there is space to also look at some of the wealth taxes. Is a space to increase some of them. We know there's not that much more, but still there should be some. But that can be utilized to help protect lower middle income earners from seeing their wages being eroded. Chair, on the economic and social relief front, I mean, so we really welcome the appropriation bill and the budget, the extension of the SOD grant, but I think it's quite scandalous that it hasn't been adjusted for inflation since it came into effect in 2020. We're seeing inflation, hitting all-time highs, the repo rate hitting a 14-year high, yet we haven't sought fit to increase just for inflation this huge poverty relief program for the poor. We really welcomed the presidential employment stimulus, has given a pathway to enter the labor market for many young people who are unemployed, but we're quite alarmed, Chair, that we're cutting back on it in the budgets. Last year, it was cut in the MTBPS from 24 billion rand to 18 billion rand. In the budget this year, in February, it was cut to 9 billion rand, and government's planning to end it at the end of this financial year. And to us, Chair, we should be saying we should be extending beyond this financial year, and we should be increasing it, or not cutting it, and seeing can we not take on board at least 2 million active participants, because this is a critical way to helping people get skills and experience and a salary, and also to be a benefit to the companies which host them, or the departments. We are looking forward, Chair. We've had good engagement with Treasury around the tax amendment bills to allow struggling workers early access to the pension funds. We hope to see those bills at Parliament by June and October, so it can come into effect on the 1st of March. I think I've covered the issue of the fuel price, Chair. But yeah, to make the point, Chair, that the Road Accident Fund is a mess, and we need to see the RAF and the RAVIS bills being tabled at Parliament if we want to overhaul them. Chair, I think on the Eskom front, we don't need to go to too much because we dealt with the Eskom debt relief bill, but we need to welcome that. But we do hope to see through DMRE the revival of the solar panel program for RDP houses. On transit and process, Chair, I think we welcome the additional allocations to them, and those are positive. But I think if they're to be successful, we need to really see the law enforcement institutions, the police, the Defence Force, etc., giving the support necessary to protect our railway network. And of course, to see how can we regulate the informal scrap dealers, so we can stop this, kind of perforation of our railway network. Chair, we had welcomed the 2.4 billion rand given to the post office, but it's quite alarming that they plan to retrench an additional 4,000 staff, and they want to cut the salaries of the remaining 9,000 staff by 40%. We don't see a turnaround plan, but what we see is the post office.
Matthew,
I comment, Chair.
Sorry to interrupt you. I've got a little bit of a challenge. Christelle from Youth Capital. There's something happening with the rights between you and the secretary. Mashile.
Sorry, what do you need me to do?
Hello, Chair.
Please tell Christelle what you are trying to get from her.
Hi, Christelle, how are you?
I'm fine, and you?
Okay, I have inadvertently made you the host, so please change that and
give it back to you.
Yeah, please, because there are people that are on the waiting. Yes.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay. Thank you so much.
No worries. Sorry, Matthew. Thank you.
Right.
Okay. So, Mashile.
Yes, Chair.
Please, can you ask Christelle to give you her mobile number so that between the two of you can communicate?
Yes, I will do that.
And the chat doesn't come in there. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Comrade, my apologies. I needed to sort this one out because there are members who are waiting and they couldn't admit to them. Okay. And okay, please proceed. So you can see there's something happening there.
Sure.
Yeah, you may proceed if you can, Matthew.
Okay, sure. No, thanks, Honorable Chair. So I think on the issue of Denel, Chair, again, that is, we had welcomed the additional revenue funds given to Denel in the budget in October, but, it's quite worrying, Chair, that, 8 months later, you still have reports about delays in a turnaround plan and delays in Denel submitting financial reports. And this was once a world-class SOE, but yet one which has been struggling to pay its staff, often for 18 months at a time. Chair, I think one of the huge positive parts of the budget of the appropriation bill, including over the MTEF and this bill, is the real investments in infrastructure. There's 225 billion rand in this financial year. And if you look at over the MTEF, it's 900 billion rand in infrastructure for rail, for roads, housing, student residences, sanitation and water, energy and ports. So we think there's really going to be, if you can spend the money and spend it correctly, it can really help grow the economy. So that is quite positive. Including the allocation for 351 billion rand for transport, the 32 billion rand share for Metro Rail, for additional carriages. But again, that has to come with a security issue, because it's great for Metro Rail to get an additional 146 carriages, but this is the same Metro Rail which lost about 100 carriages to arson and criminality. So we need to give them the support on this, on the law enforcement front, otherwise the money may just be lost. But we do want to welcome the 132 billion rand for water infrastructure, given that it's a huge crisis. And there's been a positive increase in funding for roads. But again, Chair, these are all positive, but we need to really put in much more considered effort from the law enforcement side. I mean, you have continuous reports about construction site extortion by mafia across the country, even in places like Cape Town. And we think also, Chair, there is a positive space to designate local procurement as well for the construction sector, as has been done for cement. Chair, I don't need to go too much into local government because we covered that under the Division Revenue Bill, but I think just to make the point that we have, 175 municipalities in real financial difficulties. About 27 municipalities are struggling to pay their staff or to pay their deductions. We've got about 41 municipalities who owe Eskom over 50 billion rand. Many are struggling to provide basic services. Yet in the COGTA allocation, we don't see what is the plan from COGTA side to intervene, or from Treasury side. We see some vague efforts to do workshops and what's to give advice.
I'll let you.
Hi, can everybody else on the platform mute his or her mic? In this instance, his mic, because it was definitely a maid, so that we don't interrupt the presenter. Please. Comrade Matthew, please continue.
Sure. No, thanks, Chair. So yeah, I think for us, we would have hoped to see in the COGTA budget some sort of a roadmap to move us towards a district development model. We've been talking about it for years, but we don't really seem to be making much progress. I think we all know the issues, Chair, of how much we lose to corruption, wasteful expenditure, yet we don't really see in the appropriation bill what exactly is the plan to turn things around in the different departments. I mean, Parliament has passed the Auditing Amendment Act. We haven't seen many officials feeling the wrath of it, yet it's a very progressive act. We know there's talk about doing lifestyle audits in the public service. We haven't seen much progress on that front. And Chair, if we're ready to tackle the issue of corruption and criminality, then we should be raising alarm bells around the decline in the police service headcount. We've gone from, when we had the World Cup, of having about 208,000 SAPS members, to last year about 172,000. So it's positive we even appointed an additional 10,000 last year. There's a plan to appoint 5,000 this year. But if you have an annual retirement, resignation, and passing away rate in the police of about 12,000 a year, then we're just kind of holding our water above. So we're really far behind where we should be. If you look at the budget for the police service, it's a below inflation budget increase of about 3.7%. So that's quite worrying. Though we do welcome the additional funds, Chair, for the NPA and SARS to fill vacancies. And we are, pleased with progress and hope to see Treasury tabling the public procurement bill at Parliament in the next few weeks. Chair, on basic education, it's always positive to see allocations for infrastructure, for new schools, for new classrooms, for sanitation, etc. But we often see those stats year after year. We don't really see the department being accountable for when exactly they're going to eradicate the backlog of school infrastructure. We hope that over the MTEF they can do that. Chair, we do welcome the movement by the department to integrate early childhood development into schools. And the additional funds allocated for teaching, for materials, etc., is positive. Especially positive, I think, as a previous presenter mentioned, was the teaching assistance funded by the Presidential Employment Program. But Chair, those are coming to an end as that program ends this year. We hope that Parliament can intervene to extend that program. And of course, Chair, the below inflation increase for the department also is quite worrying as well. Chair, I think, the additional funds for NSFAS is positive. But I think we've seen the crisis at some of our universities like CPUT, where there's been cuts in the amount allocated to residence accommodation, and that's quite worrying. The funds for NHI, over the MTEF is positive, but again, we've got a below inflation increase to the Department of Health, which again is worrying. And we think there's a vacancy, Chair, of actually, we need to appoint about 97,000 health workers really to get to grips. And I think the recent outbreak of cholera is a reminder once again of the need to invest in health infrastructure. Chair, again, I think the allocation to human settlements for formal settlements is positive. The increases for basic services is welcome. For electrification is also positive. Chair, and again, we just want to highlight the presidential employment stimulus, which has played quite a positive role in the neighborhood development grant on the greening programs. But again, Chair, we know the conditions of townships and communities across the country. We shouldn't be ending this program, we should be extending it, given the positive impact it's been having. Chair, I think the allocations, the increase to agriculture, to the land bank are positive. The allocation to industrial financing is welcome. But again, Chair, if we're having a below inflation increase for industrial financing and exports, that's quite worrying. And that comes against the backdrop of a decline in funding by DBSA. We've got, over a dozen, almost 2 dozen master plans coordinated by DTIC for different sectors of the economy, from poultry to sugar to agriculture and clothing and so forth. But if we want them to succeed, we should be giving them the resources to deliver. We do hope the additional resources, Chair, given to DMRE will help to address the significant backlog of mining rights applications that can help grow the sector and create jobs. And Chair, whilst we're dealing with a flood of workers who have lost jobs, have lost wages, we should be reinforcing the CCMA, not suffocating them with budget cuts. Chair, on the security front, we must be worried about cuts to Home Affairs. We all know the long queues at Home Affairs, the cuts to the police headcount over the years, below CPI increases to courts won't help address the backlogs. And I think we've seen the impact of cuts continuously to the Defence Force and its ability to fulfill its mandate in South Africa and across the continent. So I think, Chair, in conclusion, the appropriation bill is there. I think what's now critical, obviously, is for the President to hold Cabinet, Parliament equally to hold ministers accountable for the implementation of the different commitments. We often see departments just simply forget or abandon their various commitments. We don't want to see further billions being rolled over like we see in many municipalities across the country, in provincial departments, where they've struggled to spend the monies, not when other departments are really struggling under budget cuts. We think Chair, Treasury should be a bit more pragmatic when it comes to some of the cuts and the reallocation of funds, because we shouldn't be crippling key frontline service delivery departments that the economy depends upon. And I think critically for us, Chair, the most critical thing we should be reversing is to the lack of inflation adjustments for the SOD grants. The need to extend it next year, and again, to extend the Presidential Employment Program beyond next year, or not to be cutting it next year. So I think, Chair, we don't have the luxury of time anymore. Elections are in about 11 months. Voters are watching all of us, and that this what we do in the next few months is going to inform how they vote in the next elections. But let me stop there, Chair, and thanks for giving us space to raise our views. Thanks, Chair.
Comrade Matthew Parks from COSATU, thank you very much for the presentation and the issues you are raising. Can I go to equal education? Equal education, please come in. Equal education, are you muted?
Good morning, sorry.
Okay.
I am, yes. The network in the Eastern Cape is always sabotaging us. Pardon us. Good morning, honorable members. I am Okay, I'm trying to share screen, but I would need assistance from the host to be able to share. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm Elizabeth from Equal Education. I'll be presenting this oral submission on behalf of our membership base across South Africa. Those are thousands of learners who are school going and parents, teachers, and principals of the school communities that we engage with. As probably a good context, Equal Education is a democratic social movement made up of learners, teachers, parents, principals who are advocating for equal and quality education in South Africa. So this morning, our primary concern or our comments are limited to the schooling sector or basic education. And we are trying to highlight the real-life implication or the social implications of these budget allocations to the learners or the beneficiaries of this, where this department serves. So we are not economists or public finance experts in the conventional sense. We are here to highlight the social implications of some of these budgetary decisions and how it plays out in the lives of learners and in school communities, especially in rural provinces and in marginalized communities where these resources are so much important or needed. All right, so we think it is important to obviously give a context of what we are talking about when we look at this sector and what the challenges are and how the resources can go a long way into addressing some of these challenges that we are experiencing. And you know, the sector is such that we are facing a poly-crisis or multiple challenges at the same time. And none of these challenges are mutually exclusive or can be addressed in isolation. They all feed into each other, and the solution to one requires attending to another as well. So we need a concerted, multi-angle, solution to address the challenges that the sector is facing. I need not to remind honorable members in this committee, if we have been following the news last week with the release of the report on reading literacy, we saw that a significant majority of our children cannot read for comprehension. This is a really important foundational skill that is needed to be able to go through the system, to succeed, exit with the required competencies and skills for further education and potentially for employment. So we are failing our children at the very foundation, and we can see it in later years when we come together and we are celebrating the matric results. When we look deep into those analyses, we see that our education system is not as efficient as it should be. We are pushing out numbers, but the quality is not so great there. So we have a learning crisis on our hand. At the same time, too, we have an infrastructure crisis. And this infrastructure crisis, I will highlight I'll go into a little bit more detail. It's not on something that is happening now. We are talking about historical backlogs and challenges that we have been struggling to undo since the dawn of democracy. So we are not even factoring in the emerging needs that will come or that are still coming up. So there's a real challenge when it comes to access to basic services and facilities to create real conducive learning environments for our learners and for our teachers to be able to do the business of teaching and learning. I need not also belabor the point in that we also have a sector and a department that is plagued by spending issues, spending challenges, and to a large extent a governance challenge. So we, from our perspective, I guess, is that we are seeing a department that is mostly reactive and does not really muster enough political will and the needed urgency to, really tackle some of these fundamental issues and to drive the sector into what we are calling, or what is now being termed, the fourth industrial revolution. So we are dealing with very basic issues that we shouldn't even be dealing with almost 30 years into democracy. And all these issues together, we have termed the education blackout, in that these challenges are working together to really disservice our learners, the future generation, and it is dimming the light on the future prospect of learners, and potentially is going to create a really big challenge for the society at large. If we take infrastructure, for example, as the example to shine the light on this education blackout, we see a significant proportions of our schools are overcrowded. We have really great sanitation backlogs, in that for majority of some of our learners, going to using the bathroom or the sanitation facilities at school is a matter of life and death. You are taking chances. You won't know where it could end up. We've still got a significant proportion of schools that are still made up of inappropriate materials, such as your asbestos, your mud schools. We have water supply issues or challenges in some of our schools, especially in your rural provinces. If you go to, for example, Mashashani in Limpopo, this situation plays out really greatly. And this has implications for female learners, especially when it impacts their attendance rate and potentially the ability to stay the course and finish the education system broadly. In other parts, you have electricity challenges, although you have a department that will tell you that all schools have access to electricity. But we know, I don't have to belabor the point, if households are struggling with power connectivity, you can imagine schools in very rural parts of the country. And with all these historic backlogs or critical backlogs, conversations with the National Department of Basic Education will tell you that all these issues, they really acknowledge that they exist, but they need substantial amount of financial investment to be able to eradicate or to solve these problems. So for instance, they've said they will need an exorbitant, close about 44 billion rands to be able to address the overcrowding situations in our schools. So to make our classrooms, reasonably populated and big enough, and to create the environment that teachers are able to manage classes and for learners to be able to learn properly, they will need quite a significant amount of water. So if you see the screen, there are a lot of other projections, and these are all in billions of rands. So of course, what we are acknowledging is that, yes, money goes a long way, or money is important in addressing a significant majority or a huge part of the challenges that I have really summarized here. So with that in mind, when we look at the funding to the sector or to schooling broadly, we realize that ending the blackout and essentially putting back the light into the learners' futures and realizing quality basic education or schooling cannot be achieved without adequate funding for the national department, provincial departments, and even at the school level as well. And for us, adequate funding means that a budget or allocations that takes into consideration rising inflation, so the cost of providing services and the cost of goods. So education relies significantly on certain services and certain goods and also personnel. So inflationary increase will go a long way, and also to take into consideration increase in learner enrollment and changing population dynamics to be able to, for the department to be able to really address the issue of providing quality services and schooling for our learners. And we feel that this budget, this 2023 allocation to the sector does not meet the criteria. So while we acknowledge that there have been nearly $1 billion added to the allocation, the projection from last year's NTF, we still insist that this allocation does not keep up with inflation, and therefore it does not do, it is not significant enough to be able to even address just the challenges or the issues that are on the table for this financial year alone. Talk of the great historical challenges that needs to be addressed for most of our learners or most of our schools to be brought onto the same playing field or onto the same level as their affluent counterparts or those in more urban and well-resourced areas. So for if we look in detail, we can see that if we take inflation into account, the budget actually decreases significantly than it would than it was projected in last year's NTEF, which is quite disturbing, because we are at a really critical stage in our democracy where we shouldn't even be seeing some of these challenges, especially as it pertains to infrastructure. And then we are also at a critical stage in policy where we are supposed to be seeing the provision of certain infrastructure and facilities that will actually put the sector in the right path towards the fourth industrial revolution. So without this with this decreasing or funding in real terms, we are not able to, or departments are not able to do the business of really funding or providing quality services to school communities, which then impacts on the learners and what they're getting out of the system broadly. And this is not a new story. It's not something that happened just this year. We are seeing that it is a continuation of a trend that was emphasized during the COVID era, and it's continued to impact the sector broadly. So this has a really negative impact on schools at the school level and at the learner level. So it means the amount of money that goes towards each individual learner in terms of their preparing them as holistically decreases, which means that the quality that we are getting out of the system is also decreasing. When we look at the school infrastructure funding, we zoom in on the infrastructure funding allocations. We welcome the additional 1.5 billion that has been earmarked for overcrowding over the next 3 years, because we recognize and we have been advocating for an intervention of some sort for the past 2 years, highlighting that overcrowding is really robbing our learners of quality education, and in that we could be churning out as many matriculants as possible. But if what we are coming up, what learners are leaving schools with is a certificate or a qualification that is questionable and that does not actually give them the enough basic competencies and skills to be able to enter into higher education or even the labor market, then we are doing a great disservice. And we see the impact, the real direct impact of overcrowding on learning outcomes in our high schools, and also on teacher motivation and retention in that aspect as well. So we welcome that additional funding. We equally welcome the 283 million that has been earmarked for to assist flood damaged schools in the Eastern Cape and your KZN. This is a great welcome, a great news for us, because these two provinces, together with Limpopo, really account for a significant proportion of the infrastructure challenges, and almost all the problems in the sector are disproportionately highlighted or salient in these provinces because they are historically they've been historically under-resourced or under-invested, and they're also mostly rural provinces, and they tend to be the provinces that also unfortunately service majority of Black learners, which really highlights the inequality in the sector broadly. So we welcome that investment. With that being said, we realize that these additions really then increases the infrastructure funding, and it even pushes it up. It pushes it up above inflation when you think about it in real terms, which is great. But if we take that away, or when we look at it over the next, across the medium term, we see that there's a huge drastic decrease in the next financial year, a projection of with a decrease of about 4.3%, which really shows that there's not consistency in actually trying to address the challenges that infrastructure poses for the sector and for learners broadly. So this is a really disturbing and a problematic trend for us, and we wish to highlight it to the committee. So, the sector really needs the financial investment. It is quite unfortunate to see that higher education receives 3 times the amount of funding to the basic education sector, yet schooling forms the foundation of this, our education system broadly, and for the productive livelihood of our society. So the underfunding of a really critical sector like basic education, and it spells really problematic, or it spells problems for higher education later on, because what we fail to fix at the foundation then becomes a problem on the next level and the next level. So what we are experiencing at the basic education has implications for higher education and for the labor market broadly. And so we feel that it is important to address the funding deficiency in the sector. But beyond that, enough funding is not the only, or it's only one part of the solution to the problem that we have highlighted as an education blackout. So we cannot shy away from the fact that our sector is also plagued by spending challenges and issues of corruption. So we have to also address that aspect, and the way that we need this the sector to come together is be able to make sure that there are no holes in the pockets of our pockets, so that when Treasury puts the extra funds into it, we are not wasting it away, or we are not losing it, and it is going towards quality education provision. So funding allocation is only one part of the current crisis. We have a sector that is plagued by underspending. Auditors General report will show you really stark statistics about irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure with the department, the national department, and even individual provincial education departments are often highlighted as really, among the top departments with problematic spending, and that needs to be addressed if we are to actually make sure that the little money that we get or we have goes a long way into providing the services to learners and school communities. So we feel and we believe that the state of our schools would be drastically improved if our education department also spent judicially, properly, and wisely. And for that to happen, we need this committee and other relevant oversight bodies to play their part in making sure that the money, the sector is not only getting enough funding to address the challenges, but the way they spend the money is actually the right way, and it is going towards the right things to be able to really register changes in the sector and to move the progress along, and not to just waste it. So we need this honorable committee and government at large to acknowledge the education blackout with as much vigor as they've acknowledged the ESCOM energy crisis, and to ensure that schools and the sector get enough money to tackle the challenges that they experience on a daily basis. These challenges are not new, they have inherited, and we have not even begun to speak about the ones that are yet to come or that are cropping or are creeping up. So we call on this committee, we call on other oversight bodies to, quite frankly, if we are able to reject this budget and to call for a revision of this budget that takes into consideration rising learner enrollment or numbers, rising inflation, the price, the cost of goods and services, so that the budget actually, the money that the sector is going to get is able to afford the kind of things that it needs to address or plug some of these holes or gaps that we have highlighted at the very beginning. We also need this committee and relevant oversight bodies to really come to the table when it comes to performing their oversight duties and responsibilities in helping us to engage with the department, to be able to monitor and scrutinize how the department spends its money, so that we can curb some of these spending issues or challenges as it pertains to underspending, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, irregular expenditure, because it is morally inconceivable for a department to be wasting away at their monies, their little budgets that they have, when schools have no toilet facilities or learners are learning under a tree or in a mud school. It is questionable, and we need the department to really start spending properly. And a part of doing that is for this committee to help us to monitor and to really apply consequence management, proper consequence management, because of ever so often we find departments get away with murder, very little is done, and we get apologies, but nothing really substantively changes. And then the story or the saga continues when something big happens, like the loss of a child due to inappropriate sanitation. And finally, we would also like the committee to ensure proper oversight is provided, especially in areas of policy formation. So currently, the norms and standards for public school infrastructure that seeks to really address and to hold the department accountable for providing quality infrastructure and services to schools are under review. The proposed amendments were quite shocking for us, and we felt was retrogressive in addressing the challenges in the infrastructure challenges in the sector. We would like the this committee and other oversight committee to really provide proper oversight in that norms review, and when it gets presented to Parliament, to make sure that indeed the departments are actually proactively delivering on their mandate and not just paying lip service to learners and school communities. With that being said, we thank you for this opportunity to present the concerns of our members and for school communities that we engage in and we monitor across the country. We think that it is important for this education blackout to be given enough airtime as ESCOM's crisis has been, and in providing schools the needed money and oversight to ensure that our learners' futures are indeed bright and not dimmed. Thank you.
Miss Elizabeth from Equal Education, thank you very much for the input. May I request Public Service Accountability Monitor to come in? Public Service Accountability Monitor, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Honourable Chair, honourable members of the committee, other presenters and everybody else here on the platform. My name is Lisa Higginson and I'm the Budget Advocacy Coordinator at PSAM, the Public Service Accountability Monitor. For those who don't, sorry?
Lisa, Let me request Elizabeth to take down her presentation.
No problem.
Elizabeth?
Oh, I'm trying. I'm very bad at this, sorry.
Okay. Machine, come in. You guys are hosting.
All right. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
I've made Lisa the co-host, yes.
Okay, good. Lisa, let's go.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I was just saying, for those who don't know, PSAM has been making submissions to this committee for some time. For those who don't know, we are an organized civil society organization. We form part of the School of Journalism and Media Studies at Rhodes University in Makanda, Eastern Cape. Our activities include research, monitoring, advocacy, capacity building, focused on addressing societal problems originating from systemic public resource management failures. We welcome this opportunity to make our submission on the 2023 Appropriation Bill. Our presentation today focuses on the resourcing of South Africa's anti-corruption system. We had anticipated that it would be a joint sitting, so apologies to anybody who is hearing or seeing this presentation for the second time, but we think that this is really an important issue that needs to be addressed. Right, let me just put this on presentation mode and we can start. So we are starting from the NDP, the National Development Plan, Chapter 14, set the goal that by 2030, South Africa would have zero tolerance for corruption, recognizing that fighting corruption requires a well-resourced anti-corruption system that operates free from political interference and has the support of all citizens. So our presentation today is structured as follows. We've looked at some of the key frameworks. We've looked briefly at the resourcing and performance of key departments and entities. We'll discuss briefly the coordination between some of these efforts and entities. We'll make our conclusion and share some of our findings and recommendations. For those who are looking at the slideshow later on, we have included slides of the historical spending. We looked from 2012 right through to the MTEF allocation to 2025-26 to get a sense of some of the trends. And we just note here that, you know, we see more or less quite a flat trend in funding, and we don't think that this really reflects what we think should be a quite significant ramping up of resourcing to these entities to address the problems that are surfacing. So as I said, we looked at just some of the frameworks. We recognize that there are a number of them. There are some that exist within departments, within different entities, at local government. There are some older frameworks, but we've focused on the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. We've looked at the procurement bill, just given the recognition of the links between weak procurement, corruption, and how this impacts the budget. And as we've heard today, many of the important programs that have been designed and intended to address some of the problems that we are facing. And we also look briefly at the Zondo recommendations on procurement. So you'll see in the slide here that I've included the dates, or some of the dates for these strategies. Here we really want to emphasize that you know, that these issues have been under discussion for a very long time. They've been prioritized supposedly for quite some time, but we're seeing very little progress. So the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, here emerging from the NDP in 2012. It was initiated in 2018. The draft was published in 2020, and this is supposed to be the overarching strategy. One of the recommendations is to have a permanent institutional state entity that would be responsible for implementation. And as we'll see later on, it's a bit unclear of how much progress we've made and where we are. The procurement bill also released in 2020, but initiated in 2014, I understand, after a recommendation from a parliamentary committee to Treasury to work on modernizing the system, recognizing some of the weaknesses and the fact that the system wasn't necessarily meeting its objectives. the procurement bill was intended to introduce a single framework for procurement to address current weaknesses in what was seen as a fragmented system. And the Zondo recommendations on procurement were included in the report released in 2022. And as far as we understand, they've been accepted by the President with a commitment to implement. But yet, although there are positive signs, we haven't seen a lot of progress. So in light of this, as far as we could tell, there isn't a sort of a single document or a report or a part of the NACS that provides a clear indication of how the strategy, how the system should be resourced, how many prosecutors are required, where the gaps are in investigating capacity, etc., what the coordination looks like. So what we did in the absence of that is to just get a sense of the historical budget allocations to some of these entities below, and try to understand what some of their priorities were from looking at, or are from looking at, their annual reports and strategies. So you'll see there that we've looked at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, the Special Investigating Unit, the National Prosecuting Authority, the FIC, which is the Financial Intelligence Commission, SARS, and the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer. The FIC and the OCPO in particular are included for their role in procurement reform and overseeing the procurement system. And as we said, there are some serious weaknesses in that system that need to be addressed. Looking at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, we note that the budget has remained relatively flat, with a slight decline in real terms. Although the department has quite a broad mandate, it's not purely focused on corruption. We recognize that the department plays a key oversight role in the operations of the NPA, SIU, Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, and we noted quite serious challenges exist in this department around poor financial management and internal controls, performance management, noting 900 million in irregular spending was reported in the 21-22 annual report. The annual report also describes some challenges with the supply chain management system and recruitment processes, leading to underspending of 600 million rand in 2021-22. And we question what impact this has on other entities and whether there are additional resources that could be made available for key crime and corruption fighting entities. We looked at the NPA as well, and we note that the NPA received additional funds in 2019, and an additional amount of 1.3 billion has been allocated over the MTEF in response to their request for, I think, about 1.2 billion to fill additional vacancies and rebuild capacity, continuing from some of the progress that they'd made in the past. However, we note that this doesn't seem to have translated into very ambitious targets for convictions. The numbers don't quite match the scale of the problem as we understand it, with more than 1,400 individuals implicated in the Zondo report and several others in other cases being investigated. We also note very poor uptake of SIU referrals, and note that the NPA plays a really important role in this idea of consequence management. It's great to have bad contracts set aside and to have funds and assets recovered, but unless there is real consequence management, there is no deterrent for individuals to make bad decisions that impact others. Looking at the SIU, we also see quite a number of adjustments in spending since 2012 in our analysis. We note that the department does only receive a portion of its funding from the fiscus, with the balance made of revenue from services rendered. So when the SIU is required to do an investigation of a department, they pay for those services, and this really creates an inherent conflict in the funding model. And this has been raised for quite some time now as a threat to their sustainability. So we also note that despite these funding challenges, they've performed quite well, achieving their targets and managing to recover quite significant funds. Overall, I think the budget for the SIU is somewhere in the region of 500 million. And like some of the other presenters had said for SARS, this is also possibly a really good investment where additional funds often translate into additional funds recovered and bad contracts set aside, saving money for programs that we desperately need to implement. We also looked at the Public Protector and the South African Human Rights Commission, noting that they also play a role in the anti-corruption system, providing really an interface with citizens to report challenges, to report issues. And they also, the Public Protector in particular, also has a program for whistleblower management. They both receive also quite a small share of the budget, about 350 million and 200 million respectively. And we note that the allocations haven't really increased in real terms, despite an increase in the mandate of the Public Protector. From the performance reports, we note that very few of the complex cases are finalized and very few of the recommendations have been implemented. And we recognize that some of this is due to budget constraints, but also perhaps points to the need for better oversight, better planning, and better performance management. Quite similarly, for the Human Rights Commission, there have been some issues raised with some of the internal controls, and also possibly not great follow through on the recommendations and the findings of their investigations into various matters, particularly, I think, recently around local government. The FIC, SARS, and Office of the Chief Procurement Officer fall under the National Treasury, whereas the previous ones were under the Department of Constitutional Justice and Constitutional Development. But they also form part of the anti-corruption system, in particular around financial crime and procurement-related corruption. We are encouraged to see quite significant increases in real terms to both the Chief Procurement Officer and the FIC. This appears to be mostly in response to the FATF report and the grey listing, but we hope that this will really assist with dealing with complex financial crime and the issue of illicit financial flows and money laundering. I think some of the previous presenters alluded to the very kind of low fiscal multiplier and employment multiplier, and we know that as long as funds that are meant for social programs are being diverted through corrupt activities out of the country, that we won't see an improvement in that multiplier. So, and which we so desperately need to make sure that our public spending translates into better outcomes for all. I think it's already been mentioned, but the SARS operation budget does appear to have coincided with better revenue collection, and I think we would echo the call to ensure that this entity is well resourced, not only to improve revenue collection, but also in its role in solving financial crime, addressing corruption. And we're encouraged to see that new performance measures have been introduced linking to NPA referrals. Coordination, we think, is really important. We note that there are several stakeholders involved in the anti-corruption system. We've looked at just a few here, but there are others too within the departments and non-state actors. The National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, the NACAC, they play an important role in the implementation of the NACs, and however, there are additional structures that are also playing a coordination role, such as the Anti-Corruption Task Team. And it's unclear, how coordination, how these various entities are coordinated, how they're funded, and how they're spending their money. We understand that the NACAC gets some of its funding through the CARA funds, which is from the asset recovery, but there's I think perhaps not quite enough transparency and clarity on the progress, what's happening, and what the resourcing requirements are for implementation of the strategies. We also note the recent revelations of very poor coordination between the SIU, where we've seen a number of SIU investigations referred to the NPA have not been taken up. And we recognize that this has an impact on the efficiency of the funds being used. And there really is a need to ensure that consequence management is implemented. And we see this as the prosecution of those found guilty of corruption as part of that. I think here we said it's a bit less clear how procurement reforms, including the procurement bill and the Zondo recommendations, are coordinated and integrated into the anti-corruption system. And again, streamlining all of these various interventions will help to ease the financial constraints and hopefully improve outcomes. In conclusion, we note that corruption impacts democracy, service delivery, social and economic development, investor confidence, and public trust. We haven't gone into detail of what the impacts and implications are. We think that these have been discussed at length, although perhaps there is need for more awareness to really understand just how urgent this matter is and how urgently we need to start implementing our strategies. These efforts should be our priority. Although the frameworks have been developed and institutions established, they need to be adequately resourced to be effective. We welcome the additional resources, but we believe more needs to be done to improve outcomes. And as part of this, we think a clear resourcing plan is required to ensure that these needs are met, and also to be able to hold those tasked with implementation of anti-corruption measures accountable. I'll just take you through a few findings and recommendations. Again, ideally, we would like to have seen a resourcing plan that we could work against, but these are just based on some of the findings from our analysis. The challenges within the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development are of concern, and we'd like to encourage the committee to interrogate this further to ensure that funds are adequately spent and that oversight is performed adequately. Our second recommendation here is to explore the possibility of reallocating funds within the vote to ensure adequate resourcing of the anti-corruption system. The increases to the NPA have enabled the institution to fill vacancies, but we question why performance targets have not really increased, and whether they are really adequate given what we know, the scale of the problem. And we urge the committee to review the past performance and targets and seek an explanation from the NPA. And again, here a robust resourcing plan would really help us to understand what some of these challenges are and what kind of targets could be realistic. We, as mentioned, the NACAC funding, we think needs to be more transparent, and we need to make sure that this committee is adequately funded to speed up implementation of the anti-corruption strategy. And lastly, given the numerous stakeholders involved in anti-corruption efforts, these coordination challenges are really of concern. We'd like to find out whether the MOU has been concluded between the various entities, and how these various coordinating structures will work. And I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. Once again, I thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today. I will stop sharing. There we go.
Ms. Lisa, thank you very much for your presentation. Now I will allow the honorable members to come in. Honorable members, we had the presentation from the members of the public. Now it's your opportunity to interact with the issues that they would have raised. My request is that as you do that, please indicate who are you directing your question to. Let you know how we do it. Let me see who would like to start.
Sure.
Honorable Tobias.
Yes, but I'm worried today you look like a spook. I don't know why on my gadget. So why are you like a spook on my gadget?
Come again?
Chair.
Yes.
I'm asking why are you looking like a spook on my gadget?
Me?
Is it only
Yes,
me or are you today a spook?
No.
Yes.
I'm load shedding. That's the problem.
No, okay, Chair. Okay,
Yeah.
no, I thought maybe you are doing what you were doing underground.
He's still continuing, Honorable Tobias.
It's possible.
So I wouldn't like to be spook. So I've switched off my video. No, it's low shading. I'm not in my natural habitat today. So Honorable Tobias is number one. Number two.
I'm from Memezi.
Honorable Memezi.
Kaiso.
Honorable Kaiso.
Matafa.
Honorable Matafa. Any other honorable member on the platform would like to have a bite on the presentation? Okay, that's fine. Let me request Honorable Tobias to start, please. Please break the ice, Honorable Tobias.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to be short on the basis that today the network kicked me out, so I was able to only catch up the presentations when Comrade Matthew was making a presentation. But my take is more on what Lisa has said, and I want us to just be in a culture of discussing what is the role of the Standing Committee on Appropriations. I will want to know if Lisa will agree with me that the Appropriations Committee is not a policy formulating committee. Because when I listen to many presenters as they appear or during public hearings in committees, they think we can handle the balance of forces in relation to policy formulation and regulations. Ours is to look at the fiscal impact. So we pass as bills. Therefore, it means there's a policy space made somewhere. Ordinarily is done by cabinet ministers, and they will decide on the strategic outlook on the direction they want to take. But we are going to count the rents and cents whether they're going to have an impact on the very same policy that they have adopted, because that policy is decided by the South African government. But we are also going to monitor whether that policy implementation is within the fiscal framework is established, and whether the money has been used for the intended purpose, or whether morally and socially that budget it's reasonable on what it wants to achieve. So I want to ask you whether perhaps in what you have said, because you said the committee must monitor and you want the committee to scrutinize, do you think that is the mandate? If so, what else do you think the Appropriations Committee can do beyond just passing the bill and listening to public opinions in relation to whether this that has been allocated it's relevant and will have impact? Because that's what we measure. Beyond that, we don't formulate policy. But I would like to hear, it can be anybody, Chair, who will respond to that, so that we know going forward, how do we deal with policy imperatives? I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Honorable Tobias. Honorable Memezi.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I hope I'm audible in the environment I'm finding myself in.
Very much so, Honorable Memezi. Please proceed.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe let me start by appreciating the presenters, for a lot of research that is shown as they are presenting. My first question will go to youth capital, because their analysis is really dealing with what is a problem for all of us South Africans, in particular us politicians. What the issue of unemployment is it's a big issue for all South Africans. Now, my question to Crystal is, from where she sits, what is she finding as the problem? Why? Because from where I sit, Crystal, the government have done everything possible to ensure that the environment is conducive for investors, which means the private sector, to invest and create more jobs. Her input didn't come out to see this as the problem, that the government, in terms of the laws that we have changed, ensuring that the private sector find it easy to work within our environment, South Africa. But the unemployment is skyrocketing every day. And the figures, the percentage she's putting, our plans we put, we are nowhere to meet these unemployment targets, because we have done our part, but the private sector, from where I sit, is not coming to play its part. I want to understand if, because she didn't elaborate on the reasons for unemployment, he just made it clear good we planned for this, but we have not met this target, but not indicating the reasons for not meeting this target, which to me is what I've already said. But I want to hear from her if my position would be right, that we are failed by the private sector. We are failed by the captains of industry who are not really assisting. But as government, I think we have done a bit, but I would want to hear from her on this aspect. That is for Crystal. On COSATU, I really appreciate mine is appreciation on the lot of work they've done. I can't believe that they have done this kind of work almost in every aspect, in every department. That I appreciate. Matthews, comrade, it's a lot of work, but you see, when these things are said, including the issue of public sector crying on wages, I would want to check from Comrade Matthew if your views on lack of commitment on the public sector. From where I sit, I'm been very close to public sector. You see, I've been with them. So, there's a bit of focusing on wanting more wages. More salaries, more increases, than commitment at work. When you go to where everybody is working, you find them doing window shopping. Of course, Comrade Matthews, is not everybody, but public sector, from where I sit, and I've been part of, people working close with them, they tend to be really too relaxed. When you can't even compare them with the private sector, they are nowhere, because they go to work to hang a jacket. Of course, my comrades would feel good, but I think at one point we have to be telling each other, because in the end of the day, we're failing our country, we're failing our community, because one of the presenters was dealing with the issue of budget not being spent. Who must spend this? The same people who are employed in public sector to spend the budget, and the budget is not spent. Where it is spent on a wrong, things. So I would want to hear the comment, Matthews, on this thing of lack of commitment. I would say it's like patriotism is not what we used to see during apartheid by other people. You see how committed they were, and the patriotism they were showing. But from where I sit, I do cry that you find people doing window shopping when they are supposed to be doing work. There's a lot of budget not spent. Why? Because people have no time. So I would want, I know I'm a bit critical, but because they are hard workers, but they are not many. They are not many. That is on the COSATU side. On the education side, I think, Elizabeth, I share with your cries, in particular on the side of budget being not spent. I view that as a crime. You want a big budget, you are given a big budget, now it is not spent. It's a big crime to the ministers, it's a crime to the DGs, it's a crime to chief directors. So I think I really not a friend of people who are not spending budget, in particular on education sector, because it compromises the poor areas, in particular the rural areas. These are the areas, because in fact in urban areas is even better because the parents there are more active, even as SGBs. But when you go to the rural areas, the teachers are almost like God. You see, the SGBs dance to the tune of the principals. You see, of course, it's not every school, but I'm a rural man as well. I'm a township man as well. I'm an urban man as well. So I speak about things I know, of course, not everybody. Chair, I think on the public service accountability monitor, I think I'm not commenting. Can I leave it there, Chairperson? But the presentation are always very helpful, to hear what people are telling us in government, in parliament. Is always a learning that we can, wherever we go, we know what people are saying to us as representative of the people. So I think I welcome what is said, but want to hear their comments from the points I've raised. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Memezi, thank you very much for that. Honorable Taiso, please come in.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I must state it upfront that I might be disadvantaged in some other areas because I attended 2 meetings at the same time, scheduled at the same time. So the Joint Standing Committee on Parliamentary Finance Management. So pardon me if I do not reach to other areas of comment. But generally, I want to raise on the same issue that my Honorable Memezi has raised around the issue of underspending. Yes, I do see a number of presentations do say something around the issue of budget cuts, which is not, budget which are not sufficient or budget cuts. But I often do not get a sense when it comes to how critical are they on the issue of, underspending, because underspending undermines service delivery. So I'm not sure whether is it deliberate not to talk about underspending, because immediately when you see underspending, it means it's a minor service delivery to our people. And that's where most of the problem starts now, complicating from one area to other area. And then, yes, and then there has to be a reaction on that on our side. So I don't quite get a reason why the stakeholders not raising the issue of how underspending undermines service delivery. Two, Chair, I think there's one area that let me welcome what COSATU has made, as always, has made very good points and very good recommendation. So we need take the advice from COSATU. Chair, the issue which COSATU raises of 5,000 police trainees versus the 10,000 which the president has said it must happen, it puts us in another corner, because now I don't know how was this 5,000 came about to be a now the number that has been minus from 10,000. I'm not sure how did this thing. Maybe we still need to get clarity from Treasury, because it can't be correct that when the president has made an announcement of training of 10,000 police trainees annually, 2023, 2024, and only a number of 5,000, it's only the one that has been put to be budgeted for. I think it contradicts now the highest office. So I think as a committee, we need to get to how people arrived at that, because for me, it's very much problematic. Yes, Honorable Chair, the issue of, we have seen how interest rates around, globally, geopolitical developments and the crisis in the market, financial markets have actually had a serious impact on our economies, to an extent that now food prices and everything has gone up, doubled the prices. So now I'm referring to the issue of the SRD, the 350, which one would agree readily with COSATU that definitely, given this situation, we have to consider it continued beyond 2024 financial year. Whilst the options which are being explored to ensure that how sustainable or how do we reach at what we call a basic income grant in future. But at the same time, I think where there is a shortfall in as far as, I think here it's serious in a sense that you only have to get budget, put budget in place for presidential stimulus packages, so that we get even over 500,000 employment opportunities through that. But when this project becomes, limited in terms of budget or budget cuts, then it's a serious problem, given the fact that there is a high rate of unemployment in the country, a very serious one. So now, as soon as there's a undermining of that presidential employment stimulus packages, it impacts upon that project itself. In fact, it undermines it. So we were not supposed to be, letting it to be undermined and through budget cuts. In fact, it is the one that is really instilling some confidence on our youth, in as far as, creating some job opportunities, and also looking at possibilities of how in future can this now result into, yes. But as well as this 360, this SRD, maybe in future, there has to be a way, how can this be broadened in such a way that people don't just only receive the SRD, but there's always something that can be done through their hands, because if you look at the presidential stimulus package and the SRD, you can work out something that can, look integrated in future, such that now at least there's an adjustment now, such that now what people, poor people receive, it is just on the or on the acceptable amounts of daily life expenditure. So these are the only comments that I wanted to put around. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Honorable Kaiso, thank you very much. Honorable Matafa, please come in. Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chairperson, members, and guests. Thank you to the presenters for the work that they have done and very informative presentations that they are making. Chair, I'm going to be very brief because in the main, I agree with most of what has been presented. Like when corruption and maladministration is discouraged and presenters are raising sharply against it. The issue of poor infrastructure implementation in the education sector, equal education is raising that. We agree with them. And I think if they follow the work of the committee, they will see when we call various ministries and their leadership so that they come and account as we track expenditure. The issue of underspending and lack of implementation of programs of the state, especially those that relate to infrastructure, are some of the areas that we raise in the main. And on the issue of the youth capital, I also agree that we need to give much attention on the creation of employment for the youth. But my request to youth capital is just to look at other areas of skills development. And I think maybe the work that they do can also assist us to be able to see that pattern, if whether the skills development programs that are initiated by government are bearing fruit. Because, Chair, in the main, we always hear of lack of skills amongst the youth. And I want to propose maybe a study just by youth capital and other related bodies to see if whether the skills capacity that is found amongst the youth is sufficient for government or the private sector to be able to create job opportunities that will be taken up by this particular youth cohort. And also linking that to the skills development programs, as I've initially indicated, is there a way that we can capacitate our youth further? And I'm also in agreement with the issue of focusing on the area of SMMEs, because my belief is that the 350 grand, yes, it is a good intervention, but it should not be seen as something that permanently the youth should depend on. We should be trying to assist our youth to enter into entrepreneurship. There are certain youth with talent. There are youth who have ideas. Maybe through a particular program, there should be a platform where these ideas are deposited, and then we try and assist them from all aspects. So there is as far as the youth capital is concerned. If they can comment on that, I will appreciate it. The last point, Chair, is on the issue of whistleblowers. We all agree that it is important that whistleblowers need protection. And as far as possible, those that identify corruption amongst their ranks, they should be able to speak on it. My view is that there has been talk around the protection of whistleblowers. I'll be interested. I think maybe COSATU will have a view on this one. What more can be done by various stakeholders to ensure that the legislative framework of protection of such individuals is fast-tracked and strengthened? Because in most cases, most witnesses will fear for their lives, and in obviously fearing for their life, they might not want to bring information forward that can help with prosecution or dealing with various issues of maladministration and corruption. But Chair, whilst I welcome all the presentations that have been made, a general question any of the presenters can respond to it. Given the public participation process that is in place, is it enough? Is it sufficient? Or is there any improvement that as the legislators we can bring on board to enhance and improve the reach of public participation so that maybe in future the submissions that we receive are enhanced to the level that is reflective of the realities of South Africa and its demographics? Anyone, if they have a comment on that one, they can please come in and just try to advise the committee further. Chair, I will pause there and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to participate. And once again, thanks to the presenters for the job well done. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honorable Matafa. Let me just get in there and join the honorable members in welcoming the presentation, and the issues that you are raising are very important. But also to say, what is more heartening for me is that most of the presenters here are young people, which means that they are taking their future, the present and their future, into their own hands. Budget is a very important instrument in the people of South Africa's hands, trying to achieve a number of socio-economic objectives. So it's very important when our young people do participate in these processes. And again, making the necessary inputs as to how the problems that the country is facing, especially the young people are facing, can be dealt with. I think we really appreciate that. I know at some stage, Comrade Matthew Parks used to be the youngest presenter, but I think that has changed now. If I'm not mistaken, he's the eldest presenter, which means how things can change. That was in jest. And again, I think we've made this point. Youth capital, Christian, we can't agree with you more. That, and we have said that if you can look at our reports before, as this committee and our debates, we've made the point that there's a huge disjuncture about what we say about the role of the SMMEs in the world generally, in as far as economic growth is concerned, and as far as employment creation is concerned, a disjuncture between that and the allocation, the budget allocation. We definitely agree with you when it comes to that. But let me come to COSATU, Comrade Matthew. The repo rate was increased by 50 basis points to 8.25% yesterday by the MPC, which is the highest level since the global economic crisis. What's your take on this? How does this affect our goal of growing the economy and creating jobs? I would like to hear you. Next question. With this big infrastructure spend, which we all welcome, why are we not seeing a GDP growth and employment opportunities, dividends from them? What's your analysis? I would say both COSATU and Youth Capital, please comment on that. Then to Lisa. My worry is around the question of illicit financial flows and base erosion and profit shifting. Do you think we're making an impact on that? because a lot of studies says billions and billions are lost through these complicated financial engineering, and the country loses a lot of money to some destinations outside South Africa. But I just want to check, what is the problem? Do you think we're doing enough there? What should be done exactly to try and make an impact on this? Those would be my questions, and I'll ask you in that order, starting with youth capital. Please come in, and then after that is going to be COSATU. You deal with the questions which you think have been directed to you. Please, Dan, you're the first one.
Thanks so much, Chair. And thank you to all honourable members for the great questions. I'm just going to go through my notes from beginning to end so I don't miss anybody. So Honourable Member Mamezi, I think you spoke about the fact that government, has created these conducive environments and why we're still seeing such high unemployment rates. There are no silver bullets for the youth employment crisis we face. It's why we've come up with a 10-point action plan. And to be honest, if you go to our website, within each of the 10 points, there's another 10 points. It's a monumental task. We're a team of 4, so we don't focus on all 10. And it's why we believe we need partnerships between organizations and government to address these, these huge challenges. So on the government side, I think things like the Presidential Employment Stimulus, and particularly looking at the Basic Education Employment Initiative, shows that government can come to the party and can come to the party quickly. I know people worked over Christmas to make the first phase happen, and that it wasn't without its challenges, but I think that program has been really great from our viewpoint as a civil society, in that the government was open to receiving criticism and to taking that on board. And so with each phase, there have been improvements. And it's why we advocate so ferociously for the continued funding and where possible, the increased funding for the Presidential Employment Stimulus. Because it does show what government can do. And I think, I'm just going to link points as I speak. I hope that's okay. And, to Honorable Mutafa, you spoke about, entrepreneurship and how can we kind of stimulate young people who are entrepreneurial or have that hustle in them. And we think that, again, that, public employment programs provide such an important step and a pathway with the right support, and partners with the DG Murray Trust who we funded are thinking about this exact thing. You have 6 months or 9 months in a school. How do you select from that pool of young people to say, actually, you've got the something, the it factor to be an entrepreneur? Let's give you some skills while you're in the program. Let's give you some kind of starter kit or some kind of support system when you exit the short-term public employment program that helps you set up your business successfully. So it's something we're thinking about actively, and we can't diminish the importance of the entrepreneurial pathway for some young people who want to go that route. So we are thinking about it, and that's some work that's been done there, and why we think that this program is so important. And then to, conducive environments that government's created, why is the private sector not coming to the party? I think we can look at all the infrastructure challenges, which is, I think, points that many of us have made today. If you are a small business owner who's running a laundry service, in some parts of this country, you are, and pardon my language, pre-screwed. Like, you either don't have water, or you either don't have electricity, or you have neither. And how is a business supposed to flourish in those times? It makes businesses are facing all of these interest rate hikes, which affect loans that they have. And so it makes it difficult for businesses to commit to taking on staff and paying additional salaries when their bottom line is being threatened. And, the infrastructure challenges with poor roads, if you rely on a transport system, or issues with PRASA, if you need to transport goods across the country via railway. So there's all these infrastructure things that I think are getting in the way of the private sector really growing in the way that it could, which could, increase our economic growth as a country. So I think these are some of the things that we can think about when we look at the overall budget and how it's been spent. And I think throughout my presentation, I made the point of how do we intentionally spend in areas where we're going to get a big return on our investment, because I think that's what we need. We need to get a lot of bang for our buck. And so I think those are some of the things that I think we can look at. Honourable Member Mutafa spoke about skills development. This is another area that we are in conversation with the DG Murray Trust about. To your point, what are the skills that the economy needs? why are there so many people who are coming out of a TVET and not getting a job and then saying, well, I wasted my time studying and now I can't get work? There are various reasons for that. Some of them are that they're studying things that, you know, are saturated in the market and aren't needed. Other times, young people are only getting the theoretical experience and not the practical experience because they can't find places to do their work-based learning. It's work that we're busy doing. We're traveling across the country and speaking to TVET students about that experience. And then I think we also need to be proactive. So oftentimes we're very reactive and we're like, oh, we need digital skills today, but you need to plan for that now, for 5 or 10 years from now. If you think about the just transition, what are the skills that the green economy is going to need? And we need to look at all levels of skill. Not all young people are going to be, you know, engineers that are going to be building solar plants. Not all young people are going to be coders. Some people are, and let's, you know, support those pipelines, but let's think about low level and semi-skilled work in these sectors. I think tourism, I'm from Cape Town, I'm in Cape Town now, and I think that's always going to be a place where we can create more jobs. So let's look at these sectors. Let's forecast for 5 or 10 years from now and think what are the skills we can get into young people quickly, easily, low cost, and at scale to make sure that young people today are ready for the skills that are required tomorrow. So that's something we think about actively, and happy to engage with anybody here on that work as we go forward with that. And I'm trying to think who else. Chairperson Buthelezi, you spoke about why do I think that the GDP growth hasn't been what it could be, and I think infrastructure is a big part of it. And I also think that we don't think about young people as a, you know, a dividend, as we're missing out on the potential of millions of young people. The reason private sector is not employing young people goes to a lot of what Equal Education said. Our education system is not preparing young people who come out of school, even if they complete matric, and remember many of them don't, but even if they come out of matric, employers that we are speaking to, young people just don't have the soft skills that the world of work requires today. Communication, emails, and there are various reasons for that. But I think we need to look at how we can equip young people to step into the world of work more fluidly. And I think a lot of youth employment programs are trying to fill that gap. But there again, there's millions of programs and the quality of them, you know, some are great, some are not so great. And so how do we look at kind of getting a more cohesive agenda there? To get young people into the economy, because I think that is a wasted potential that could help us get the GDP growth we need. You need people to have money to spend money, and the majority of people in this country are struggling even more, as you say, after the interest rate hike yesterday. And so people do not have disposable income, and so they're not spending, and so manufacturers are not producing because they don't have clientele to sell to, and so it's this vicious cycle. And so we need to get money into the pockets of people so they can spend it back into the economy, and you know, we can exponentially grow that return on our investment. I hope I've covered everyone's questions, but if I haven't, my email, I'll pop it in the chat. You feel free to reach out to me on anything else. Thank you so much, Chair and honorable members.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you very much. Comrade Matthew.
No, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks to members' questions and comments. I think Chair is always positive when irrespective of political differences, we're kind of largely saying the same thing.
Comrade Matthew.
Hi, Chair.
I thought you were going to comment on my statement that you used to be the youngest. Now we think tables have turned.
In fact, I was going to make a comment, Chair, when you said that you welcome the young people. I thought you were including me. But then the problem is when you see your picture on the camera, Chair, then you start seeing some little grey hairs, and you then the reality wakes up. But yeah, no, Chair. I would agree with you. It's good to get young people, because often you find that, I think, as Honourable Matafa also was raising at the concern about public participation. But we do also want to welcome, Chair, to Honourable Tobias coming back to Parliament. I think Parliament has been a bit quiet without her voice in the past couple of years. It's always good to see her making her presence felt. Chair, I think Honourable Tobias is right around this space, around the medium-term budget, around the budget. We think the space between now and the MTPS, we think the voice of Parliament, should be amplified, that government should hear it, etc. We know it's not an overnight negotiation, it's a discussion. But I think these kind of engagements are useful because it then enables Treasury to hear the views of MPs, of civil society, etc. I mean, I think, Chair, we really want to see that, come the medium-term budget hearings in October, that really hold the different departments to account around their various commitments. Because you'd often find by October, many departments are only at 30% or 40% of expenditure, yet it's halfway through the year, and we approach the Christmas season, etc. And then you would see in February, huge amounts of rollovers, monies being returned to Treasury, etc., or fiscal dumping. We think, Chair, there is a real space for members to specifically intervene around the presidential employment stimulus. We think it's political madness not to extend it next year. And in fact, we should be increasing it, not closing it. Similar with the SOD grant, we should be raising it to the food poverty line. We should be seeing how can the presidential employment stimulus help fill some of the gaps in the public service, etc. And also we should be prioritizing giving support to SARS, because if we give support to SARS, Chair, it means more money for the fiscus, it means more money into public services, more money to invest in the economy, etc. I think to Honorable Mamezi, Chair, no, we agree with Honorable Mamezi. Thank him for the support and the kind words. We agree there is a problem around Batupile in the public service, and management must play its role. So if somebody doesn't do their job, there is a normal workplace contracts, the normal grievance procedures, etc., the LRA, the BCA, etc., govern it. So management must manage. That's why they are hired, etc. But I think there is a real crisis around public service morale. Most public servants are very demoralized. You'll find most of them are drowning in debt. They're struggling to even survive to month end or the next payday. You find many public servants are filling vacancies. So you'll find a nurse in a hospital covering 2 empty vacancies. You'll find the teacher-learner ratio rising in the schools. You'll find the teacher-learner ratio in the township schools, 40 kids, even 50 or 60 kids at a time in a single classroom. Public servants, have been struggling not to get inflation-linked increases, just to keep to where they were in 2020 and so forth. You also find, Chair, that if you go to Home Affairs, where you have maybe 5 or 6 tents, workstations, only 2 staff on duty, not because other staff don't want to work, but because of a freeze on vacancies and so forth. You'll find that Home Affairs complains all the time about the lack of the poor quality internet support they get from CETA. You'll find police stations in Limpopo, for example, police officers working in a windy house. So there is real issues. We need to kind of invest in the public service to produce quality outcomes. That's why we raised, Chair, the example of SARS, because the SARS, we invested in additional staff in the IT capacity and paying decent wages. And as a consequence, you see high productivity, etc. So that should be a role model. So we also think, we praised nurses, for example, doctors during COVID. The death rate was quite high for them, but even for other workers too, municipal cleaning workers, etc., police officers. Yet, what did we do after that? We imposed a wage freeze upon them immediately. We think that we need to have a better way of managing the issues. We want to boost people. We should also understand their mothers and fathers, they're taking care of children, etc. And the failure to expend management is right, but that's a management failure in most instances. To Honorable Kaiso, so we highlighted the SAPS recruitment issue because we had shared the frustration of Honorable Kaiso for this zone and for the previous zone. The president will say we're going to hire 10,000 police officers. That's positive. But when it comes to the budget, a few weeks later, it's watered down to 5,000. Then it comes down to implementation. You find the police delay and drag their feet, etc. And then you juxtapose that against a headcount brain drain from the police service on average of about 12,000 a year. It means we're going to continue to see the police shrinking. Chair, we really want to see on the presidential employment stimulus that we should be expanding across government departments. You could roll it out to SARS, to the police, to correctional services, to the hospitals. It's been very positive in terms of impact on the schools. We think let's expand it elsewhere as well. That will help to assist the state and help people to get experience and skills and get into the labor market. Similar to the SOD grants, Chair, we should be linking its recipients to skills training programs, to employment placement programs, and really see how can we use it as a foundation for a BIG, but to help those people who receive it to find work. But these are huge, big impact items, Chair, and they relatively don't cost that much for the fiscus. But the impact upon society is massive, and we should really be extending it. And then, Chair, I think the similar point to Honorable Mutafa about the skills and employment programs, we have quite a few from these, the President Employment Program, the EPWP, the Community Works programs. We also have the seated training programs, etc. We need to have a bit of a discussion because the impact is not always what you want in terms of skills and creating jobs long term. How can we pool resources together? How can we overhaul the deployment of people and so forth? But really make sure that we fill the skills gaps that the private sector identifies, help to give support to new emerging economic sectors like recycling, for example, environmental agriculture. And you will find the Presidential Employment Program actually is doing some good work in supporting emerging farmers. Let's see how can we use these programs to fill gaps in the public service, to give support to SMEs, and even to link up to or to revive what used to be very successful artisanship programs in the private sector. Chair, I think just to the last questions, to Honorable Mutafa about public participation. I mean, it is, we'll see that many people would participate in the fiscal framework hearings, but when it comes to the DORA bill, the appropriation bills, it tends to dissipate. So I think today is a good thing. I think to be fair to members, we have seen a positive impact from our engagement in Parliament with honourable members across committees, where you can see over time the impact of raising issues. I think it benefits members, it benefits us also to hear from members and from government. Perhaps, Chair, there's a need for a better utilization of the parliamentary democracy offices. I know they are trying to level best. I think, Chair, the one benefit of COVID is the virtual platforms, because it makes it easy for somebody who is sitting in Pongola or Messina or Springbok to come participate in Parliament. And that really for us is something we should be extending and expanding, because that is a way to make Parliament available to everybody wherever they live in the country. Maybe, Chair, I think the last point of this one is that perhaps we should be communicating better to the public that Parliament has been able to change this and this by its engagement with the public to government, or we're able to hold government account. I also think, Chair, there is some committees or times who don't take public participation seriously. They would often just rush through it. Others would do a lot of justice to it and actually would go to huge efforts to do it. At times you would find some committees would rush through bills. Maybe at times it's because departments take too long to table them at Parliament, and hence there's a crisis time or management. But I think there's room from all of us, from government, from Parliament, even from civil society, even from COSATU too, because we also struggle to get our unions to be active as well. It's not an easy thing. And then I think, Chair, just to Honourable Shenge, my fellow Youth League member, I think on the repo rate, so we appreciate the difficulty the Reserve Bank is in. We can't afford for the inflation to get out of control, because that destroys workers' salaries, makes it very difficult for workers to take care of their families, to pay their debts, etc. But I think our difficulty is that the inflationary cause right now is because of the war in Ukraine. It's not because of South African economic issues. There's not much we can do about the war in Ukraine. And we seem to be taking the wrong tool to manage it. We think, Chair, we should be looking at, can we give relief to the factors causing of inflation, which is the fuel price? So can we reduce the 28% of taxes on the fuel price like we did last year? That will give some immediate relief to everybody, businesses, workers, everybody. Can we have an engagement with Eskom or with NERSA that we need to move away from the 18%, the 12% tariff hikes? Because again, that's a huge inflationary cause. We hope that Eskom debt relief will give some space to Eskom to move away from these double-digit tariff hikes. But I think, Chair, also government should be saying, what can they do to give support to the poor? Can we increase the SRD grant to protect it from inflation? Can we make sure indigent households receive the free electricity, because often they don't? Can we expand the employment programs, etc.? It does mean also, Chair, that we must address the obstacles to growing the economy, from the electricity issue, the transit, the metro rail, the local government issues, stimulating the economy, etc., because that's a fundamental way. And I think lastly, Chair, on that point, we're going to forever be exposed to whatever chaos is taking place in the world, in the Middle East, wherever. The oil price will skyrocket and we'll see inflation being pushed up. So the way to insulate and protect ourselves as much as we can in a globalized economy is to see how do we support local manufacturing industries. Can we move away from being dependent upon oil? Can we move towards electric vehicles? Can we manufacture more clothes locally? Can we support local agriculture, etc.? Because those are things we can control. Those are things which will benefit our workers and our economy and our businesses, and also help to protect us from being dependent upon imports, etc. So, yeah, I think let me stop there, Honorable Chair, and I'm glad you are saying that I'm still young, and I can tell my daughter to stop saying I'm an old man. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Then we'll go to Miss Elizabeth, equal education, followed by Miss Lisa on public service accountability monitor. In that order, please.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Chair and members for the comments. I didn't get specific questions. There were just two things that perhaps I could comment on or give an opinion. And the one is around underspending and the criminality of it and how it also undermines service delivery broadly. So, I mean, it's trite to say we agree. I mean, from the work we do and the advocacy and monitoring work we do with the national and provincial education departments, that has been one of our biggest sort of concerns or cries through the years, especially in the context of the sheer magnitude of the historic critical infrastructure backlogs and also sort of deteriorating outcomes from the sector. So there is a real paradox here, and in that on one hand, the sector does not have enough resources to actually do the business of providing quality education services to learners and school communities, particularly in rural provinces and densely populated urban peripheries or township and those working class communities. And on the other hand, we continuously, or we're beginning to see very poor financial management and planning in that even with the limited resources available, education departments are either unable to spend the budget or they misdirect it. So we both scenarios we hold to be true and we think needs to be solved simultaneously. We cannot say just because the departments are not able to spend, therefore they don't require the resources or they are not in need of the money. That is wrong, and at the end of the day, the biggest loser in this scenario are learners, primarily Black learners in rural provinces and marginalized communities. And it essentially then also tends to perpetuate the inequality that we are seeing in the sector and in the society broadly. So we need to address that challenge. It's a two-pronged approach. And here we are highlighting the role of oversight and consequence management in making sure that, yes, the resources that are being, directed at these departments are actually going towards quality service delivery, and where there is a need for more, they are getting that additional assistance as well. On the broad aspect of public participation and whether it is enough or there's a way to improve the reach to the wider population. There's always room for improvement. And I mean, if we look at today's meeting, for instance, there's a class dimension as well, right? So while we can't have everybody in the room, it is important to create avenues where there are diversity of opinions or diversity of views or access. And so we find that this kind of sitting or this interaction is often limited to your affluent, your middle class. It has a gender flavor. It's changing a little bit, but not so. There's an age element, Comrade Matthew. So there's always room to improve. And I think maybe the other scenario or the other issue is from it's just that the space has historically been very intimidating, and that young people have often felt like they have been seen not to have the wisdom or the right maturity to interact on some of these issues. And so they've taken that, internalized it, and we have taken a step back and become rather apathetic about this kind of arrangement or scenario. So maybe that's part of the problem. But I also believe that there's a lack of empowerment and capacity within the wider society for them to be able to really engage with the technicalities or the content that we are dealing with. So there's a need for empowerment, there's a need for knowledge and capacity building, and there's a need to, you know, raise people's confidence to be able to speak out and voice out some of these things that we are interrogating here today. So with that, it becomes, and obviously even with technology making this interaction easier, we also have a huge digital divide in our society. So I'm sitting here in well, not so rural Eastern Cape, but somebody maybe 20 kilometers away from where I'm sitting might not necessarily be able to log on because of, you know, access issues. So I think there's room for us to, or for honorable committee members to think broadly about how they can mobilize their education platforms and empowerment tools that they have to be able to get as many or as much voices into the conversation as possible when we are dealing with such critical issues, because the decisions or the things we are considering here has real direct impact on people's livelihood and, you know, future prospects. And it's important to hear from the proverbial horse's mouth as opposed to maybe a representative like me who is now sitting here speaking on behalf of learners who, you know, they're probably better positioned to articulate their challenges and what they need to be able to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lisa, please come in from Public Service Accountability Monitor.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. I think there were a few comments and questions for me. I think Honourable Tobias, on the role of the committee, I think I hear your frustration, and I apologise if there were elements of our presentation and our recommendations that go beyond the scope of the committee. I think, you know, for us, I'm navigating the public participation space for the first time, and you know, there are some complexities. You know, it can be quite difficult to understand some of the different mandates of the different committees and everything. But you know, we've quite, as an organisation, we've recently sort of turned our attention to monitoring the monitors to try and get an understanding of what the budget looks like and how it's being used by the enforcement agencies and others who are tasked with implementation of anti-corruption strategies and involved in the anti-corruption system. So yeah, I think our intention was really just, we note that there have been increases to the budgets allocated to the NPA, SIU, and some of the other entities mentioned, but without a clear understanding of what the needs are and what those funds will be used for, it's quite difficult for us to know whether it's enough and what we can expect, and where the gaps are. So thanks for the comment, though. We will take that into consideration to better understand exactly where, you know, where the committee's mandate ends, and you know, where we can take up some of these issues around the policy issues and developing implementation frameworks for the strategies we've mentioned. The second comment, I think, was from Honourable Matafa. I also wanted to just chip in on the public participation. I think I agree with a lot of what Elizabeth has said. I think that it can be seen as quite an intimidating space, and I think it would be good if the public could see that that these inputs are important and that they are appreciated, and that this is a space for discussion and debate, and to sort of highlight concerns and understanding of what the issues are. I think we also quite encouraged, I think, the pre-budget consultations that were piloted last year. We think were quite a positive step, and as far as I understand, there were a number of additional, there were a number of submissions there, and I think there's often the impression that that people would like to make their voices heard sort of before, that there's a sense that once the budget is announced that the decisions are made, and that there's very limited scope to influence the outcomes. And then, yeah, the last point on that, maybe just I missed a little bit of what Matthew was saying, but we recently visited one of the parliamentary constituency offices, and the doors were closed. And as we understand, the secretary or receptionist hadn't returned to work, so they weren't able to open, and the researcher, the field worker, was out in the field. So I think that these offices can play a really important role in spreading awareness of the budget, and also assisting with some of the capacity building. I think there is a sense that this is a space for experts and economists, and I think that maybe could be addressed somehow to get people to understand that as I said, this is a space for discussion, and people's lived experience and interpretation of the issues. Those are important as well. I think then the last point I wanted to comment on was on the illicit financial flows. I have to admit, we haven't done extensive work and research on this. Our sort of brief assessment has been on the basis of the Financial Action Task Force sort of findings of the links between corruption and illicit financial flows. And so I think, it comes back down to maybe the same points that we were trying to emphasize in the presentation, is that there's no real deterrent. There don't appear to be any consequences for these kinds of issues. And so I think that until we really show that firms, companies, individuals who are not following the rules, who are evading taxes, and that there are consequences, that we'll continue to see this sort of issue. I don't think I could really comment on exactly the strength and gaps of the frameworks, but I think implementation and enforcement is really an area that requires attention. And I think the resourcing of the NPA and some of the other entities that we've discussed today would have some kind of impact, and hopefully the additional allocations and the attention that's been brought to the issue through the grey listing will help us to better understand where the issues are, and hopefully see some results. I think that's all I wanted to comment on. But thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that. Before I let you all go, again, let me repeat what I alluded to at the beginning of the presentation. That we really appreciate you are taking time, your preparations, your research, and coming to engage with the committee. We really appreciate that, and underline again that young people are in the forefront of this. Our future looks bright then, and we should continue doing. It's a very important institution, Parliament. It makes all the laws that impact on our lives. Therefore, it's an institution that it's your institution. It shouldn't scare people away. You should be able to engage with us, raise the issues. Then on the matter of our terms of reference, what belongs to us as this committee and other perhaps committees or other arms of government, it's fine. It's fine. There is sometimes a very thin line, Lisa, on our responsibilities. And I must admit that sometimes even some of us having been here in Parliament for some time, there are still some issues which sort of are not as clear as you would love them to be. But I take a view that the public must err on the side of raising issues rather than being quiet. We as Parliament will then perhaps redirect whatever, because at the end of the day, we represent Parliament. We may have to redirect those issues to where they belong. And then another thing in terms of participation, we do deal with billions and trillions and some economics terms, financial terms, and so on, which is fine, is the space that we're in. But the platform cannot be seen to be an esoteric platform with all this jargon that we are busy with in these committees. Parliament is about all South Africans. From the village that I come from, in Mahlabatin, it's quite a rural place, to those who reside in the metropoles in Cape Town, in Constantia, and so on. This is their parliament of all the people of South Africa. So hence, I think it was Oral Matafa, he was raising the question of who would like to see as many people as possible participating in these processes, lawmaking processes, budgeting processes. Would like to see as many people as possible. And again, they must come and put it raw as it is, and so on. Some of them may not be having this live presentation and so on, but we still listen to them. I remember, I think it was during our first year, we received a letter, just a simple letter from somebody who's in Melmoth, raising issues, and this committee looked into those issues and even raised those issues in Parliament. I'm trying to say, we are People's Parliament. This is your Parliament. You help us by raising these issues, and they make us sharper. We'll raise them with some of our colleagues, some of the authorities, and don't get discouraged if perhaps you say, we raised this thing last year, or raising these things, it's going to happen, and so on. We definitely factor them in when we deal with our issues. So with those few words, you are excused, and we thank you very much for participating in this process. Thank you. You may remain if you so decide, but this takes us to the end of the of this agenda item. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Honorable members, the minutes of the 17th of May 2023 were sent to us. We've read them. We've made our inputs where we could.
In-house.
Thank you. Can I have the mover for the adoption of the minutes?
Memeze moves.
Honorable Memeze moves.
Matafa second.
Honorable Matafa second. The minutes of the 17th of May 2023 have been duly accepted. Next agenda item. When is our next meeting?
Yes, thanks, Chair. The next meeting will be next week, Tuesday, the 30th. We are hosting the National Treasury. It will give a brief on the preliminary spending outcomes for the fourth quarter of the previous financial year, as well as to have recommendations from the stakeholders that were invited to comment on the appropriation bill. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Mashile, thank you very much. So we'll be meeting on Tuesday, honorable members. And again, thank you very much for availing yourselves. And thank you very much.
Close the meeting.
Come again.
You close the meeting.
Yeah.
May I make a kind request? See, today we suffered a hiccup of not being let into the meeting. It was a systems error, I suppose, because we were waiting in the lobby. And then sometimes if they don't alert the chair or others, you will not know that was in the lobby waiting to be admitted in the meeting. So we'll end up with, so I suggest also when we write in the chat, for instance, I was in, but Mr. Maubani was not aware that I'm in. Because similarly, there's people who are not reading the chat. So they are not able to track at what point you are in and where you are not yet in. And for instance, we'll sit and think people are absconding, whereas there's a technical problem. So I suggest that we pay attention to that, Chair. And in this case, a brand new phone, Chair, was gave me this challenge. My old phone that is always making me to be in trouble doesn't really give me this serious problem. So it was the brand new one.
Perfect. I just to add on that, Mr. Mashile and
yes, Chair.
And Darren, can you make sure that all the members of parliament have your phone numbers so that they can call you, because you are the ones who always let us in? I must admit that I don't read. It's very accidental that I read a chat group, because most of the time we are having a presentation on the screen, and that's where we are concentrating. So I'm requesting that you give all the honorable members your numbers so that when they struggle, they can be able to pick up their phones and call you so that you let them in, or they raise any issue that they might be having during the presentation. Okay.
Noted, Chair. Noted.
Thank you, Honorable Tobias, for raising that issue.
Thanks, Chair.
Honorable members, thank you and congratulations with your debate yesterday, and the return that people of South Africa are looking for when it comes to the ESCOM debt relief bid is that let's have better reliability of electricity. For instance, today I looked like a spook because I was load shedding where I was. This takes us to the end of the meeting.
You should have seen that. You were really looking like a spook. You were even making reflection. Your head was reflecting. These guys are so changing you by not telling you what was happening in there. I think they were laughing in the background. They were really laughing in the background.
It was definitely load shedding, because that happened immediately when I started load shedding. Thank you very much, honorable members. Have a good weekend and take care.
The chair.